So you're joined today by myself. I'm Kate White. I'm the Public Outreach Coordinator. My colleague Sandy Johnson, who's the manager of the Unified Planning Work Program, and Roisin Foley, who's our Administrative and Communications Associate. For those of you just joining, you can share your name, role, and affiliation in the chat. But after we do introductions, we're going to do a short overview of really what the MPO is. Then Sandy's going to talk more about the Unified Planning Work Program, a summary of the studies in the federal fiscal year 2022, and next steps, and then we'll launch into discussion. So with that, Sandy, do you want to take it away?
Thanks, Kate, and thank you everybody for joining us today. So I'm going to first spend a little bit of time doing a little bit of an MPO 101, describing what we do at the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization and why you should care. So if we can advance to the next slide, please, Kate. All right, so what is an MPO? An MPO is a federally required planning entity that engages governments at various levels, as well as residents in the region and other stakeholders in a collaborative and transparent public process to fulfill a few key purposes: developing a vision for multimodal transportation in the region, distributing federal funds to construction projects in the transportation field that support that vision. All right, that is through the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, which is a rolling 5-year capital investment plan. And then finally, what we're here today to talk about, studying and analyzing transportation and carrying out multimodal transportation planning at a regional scale through the Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP, which is our annual work program for how federal planning funds are allocated to studies and technical analyses to benefit the entire region. A little bit of context. The Boston region is one of 13 similar entities in the state of Massachusetts. Federal government gives roughly $600 million in highway funding to the state annually, and of that, about 40% is sub-allocated to MPOs. There's also about $14 million in planning money that's allocated to the state, and that's what we're going to hear to talk about today. That is also like the capital funding divided up among MPOs, about 43% goes to the MPOs. That is based on a variety of formulas the MassDOT has worked up over the years. All right, so the Boston Region MPO, and there's a map on the screen now, has about 1/3 of the roads, half of the jobs and population in the state of Massachusetts. It's about 3 million people, a little bit more than 3 million people, and over 2 million jobs. It's a very large and diverse place, 97 cities and towns, ranging from relatively rural, like Dover, to large urban centers like Boston and Cambridge. So a true comprehensive and multimodal planning process has to account for the demographic, cultural, and economic diversity of the region and consider the various means by which residents and visitors travel in the region. So on the board of the MPO, which is the policy body that guides policy and makes decisions for the MPO and allocating its resources, we have a variety of different entities. There's the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, the MBTA, Massport, and then there's 12 seats held by elected municipalities in various kinds of categories, 2 seats held by the City of Boston, and then seats held by the Regional Transportation Advisory Council, which is the citizens advisory body to this MPO, by the MBTA Advisory Board. And I believe Amira Patterson is here representing the advisory board today, and the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, our sister agency, which also engages in regional planning work. All right, so the MPO, as we mentioned before, has a vision which is laid out in its long-range transportation plan, and the vision of this MPO is a modern, well-maintained transportation system that supports a sustainable, healthy, livable, and economically vibrant region. To achieve this vision, the transportation system must be safe and resilient, incorporate emerging technologies, and provide equitable access, excellent mobility, and varied transportation options. And that goal, that overall vision, is realized through 6 goal areas: safety, system preservation, modernization, capacity management and mobility, clean air and sustainable communities, transportation equity, and economic vitality. All right, so that's our pitch. That's the little bit of the boring bureaucratic background about MPOs, but why should you care? Well, MPOs try to figure out how to address transportation challenges and provide access to everyone to opportunities by addressing congestion and associated economic, health, and air quality impacts, ensuring everyone can benefit from our transportation system, regardless of age, gender, race, income, ability, or language. And finally, working on planning transportation and land use jointly to maximize economic vitality and quality of life. All right. So that is MPOs. And now we will proceed on to talking about the Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP itself. And just want to remind everybody, you can throw your questions in the chat if you do have them. So, as I mentioned a moment ago, the UPWP program's federal funding received by the MPO for transportation planning and analysis. It includes kind of a variety of different categories of funding. There are core MPO programs, which we call certification requirements. There are discrete studies selected by the MPO annually at its discretion, which we will talk about more in a moment. There are technical assistance offerings, which we'll also talk about more in a moment, that are offered to member municipalities of the MPO. And then there are the unsexy but critical support budgets that allow us to keep the lights on and the computers going. All right, so this is a kind of a very simple diagram of how ideas get into the UPWP. We do a lot of outreach and gathering public input, spend several months on that, generally in the fall, and then I and others on staff kind of take all the ideas that we've gathered from the public, from our stakeholders, from our partners, and sort them out into two piles. One of them is called the UPWP Universe of Proposed Studies, which we'll show you in a sample of in a moment. And then the other one is for our technical assistance programs. And the difference really is one of scale. So I'll explain that more in a moment, but the discrete studies, the UPWP universe concepts, tend to be larger, maybe regional, or just a larger effort, a larger lift overall, budgets in the tens of thousands of dollars. And the technical assistance programs that we provide to municipalities, those are very kind of micro scale projects and studies at the scale of a single stop sign, perhaps. Next slide, please. There. All right. So I just want to provide a couple of examples of the kind of studies that we have done through the UPWP in recent years. Over the past year, some of the staff from the MPO's traffic analysis and design group that's basically our traffic engineers, have been working along with our colleagues at MAPC on some work in the town of Norwell. MAPC has been doing some economic development and some land use work there. And along with that, they were looking at the safety of some of the roadways and the functioning of some of the roadways in the area. And so what we have here on screen is a diagram of just one of the alternatives or recommendations for safety improvements to the roadways in Norwell that our traffic engineers came up with during the course of that study. And this is something that the town has been very receptive to, and it's been we're very proud of the collaboration that's gone on between the municipal and regional partners on this study. All right, and just another example of studies. This is a study that was funded through the 2020 UPWP, and it's actually a study that I worked on myself, which looked at methodologies for what we call, in the planning world, trip generation, basically figuring out how people are going to move to and from particular developments or types of development, different destinations, by what mode, how far they travel, what it costs, that kind of thing. And this is a field that's going through some upheaval because there's been a standard method that's been really used predominantly in the United States since the 1960s or so. And as we document in the memo that came out of this study, a lot of folks are critiquing that standard method and trying to move on to something that's a little bit more scientific, a little bit more comprehensive, perhaps a little bit more progressive thinking in terms of all of the different ways that people can travel. And thank you, Roisin, for throwing the links in the chat to these various studies. All right, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what is in the UPWP that is currently out for public comment that you're all here to hear about. having kind of framed where it comes from and what it does. So what is actually here? So chart that we're showing now it kind of shows how funding is divvied up within the federal fiscal year 2022 UPWP. And federal fiscal year, just to make clear, begins on October 1st. So right now we're talking about a document that is out for public comment that everyone is invited to give input on, and that will become the governing budget document for the MPO on October 1st of 2021. And the top line number for how much money this document programs is about $7.3 million, most of which is received from our federal partners at the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. There's about $1.6 million that is actually received as revenue from work that MPO staff do on contract to other entities, but the predominant source of revenue is this federal funding coming from FHWA and FTA, of which about 63%, about $4.6 million, goes to directly to MPO staff, and then about another $1 million goes to our partners at MAPC to also execute MPO-related work. All right, so I mentioned a moment ago the universe of proposed studies for the UPWP, and I just wanted to show people what that looks like. So when we hear a concept heard in our public outreach from one of our partner agencies elsewhere as a likely candidate to become what we call a discrete study, it goes into this giant spreadsheet. This is one of, I don't know, about 8 pages this year. This giant spreadsheet called the universe of proposed studies, which gives a name, a brief description, some notes, an estimated budget if we've got one, and then there's a grid relating the concept to the goals in the long-range transportation plan that we discussed a moment ago. And so the universe of proposed studies is really the heart of the decision-making process each year. The vast majority of the content of the UPWP remains the same every year, but the universe of proposed studies is refreshed every single year, and it gives staff working with the MPO's UPWP committee, which oversees the whole process, a chance to kind of sort through all of these ideas freshly. All right, so if we move on to the next slide. All right, so the MPO also, as we mentioned before, maintains a couple of technical assistance programs. Community Transportation Technical Assistance, which focuses on roadway issues and work, and that is maintained jointly with MAPC. And then the Regional Transit Service Planning Technical Assistance Program, which does exactly what it sounds like. It provides transit service planning assistance to regional transit authorities, to the MBTA, Cape Ann Transit Authority, the Metro West Kansas Transit Authority, as well as smaller operators such as transportation management associations. Both of these programs are mainly open to municipal employees, municipal representatives. And they are very popular. I might even say oversubscribed. They accept applications on a rolling basis, unlike the rest of the UPWP process, which is kind of done on a very rigid schedule. So, all right. So I've been mentioning these discrete studies, and they really fall into 2 buckets in that universe of proposed studies that I showed a moment ago. I said that the universe is refreshed every year, and that is true. But there are also what we call recurring studies, which are kind of very popular concepts, such as that Norwell study, which is just basically our traffic engineers taking a look at a particular corridor or a particular intersection. And the UPWP committee of the MPO has essentially said, we think these are really popular. We think they work really well. We get some work products out of them that can then turn into a capital project, a construction project. And we want to do these basically every year or every other year, depending on the recurring study. There are 2 that occur every year, and then 2 that alternate. And then there's a 4th one that's a small budget line for staff-generated research, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then there's an ability to add on some additional studies on top of that. And that number can vary annually based on federal funding. We've got 6 this year. And we're actually going to go through and describe all of these. So here's the overall list, and we won't linger on this because right now it's just a boring table. But as you can see, there are kind of 10 ideas that we have here that have made it through the whole selection process of the NPO is now proposing to fund in federal fiscal year 2022. And we will go through each of these and talk about them a little bit. So trip generation follow-up, you heard me mention the trip generation study in the 2020 UPWP a few moments ago. And that we had some ongoing work during the current 2021 fiscal year on that as well. And it's proven to be very popular. Some of our municipal stakeholders have really embraced that work and found it very interesting and very helpful to them. So we put aside some money for continuing that work, working with our partners at MEPC. And likely we're going to be looking at the impact of parking policy on trip generation a whole bunch. That's really the hot topic. All right, travel demand management. Follow-up, travel demand management is a suite of policies that can be implemented by private actors or by government entities to shift travel from single occupancy vehicles, from cars to other modes, transit, bike, and walk. And during the current fiscal year 2021, we are hosting a couple of forums. We did one in February, and we are having another one in September on the topic of TDM. It's not something that the NPO has traditionally done much work on, but there's recently been more interest in it. I think especially coming out of COVID, people recognize there's going to be a need to kind of influence individual behavior through policy. And we're coordinating with MEPC and with our municipal partners on determining the need for a potential structure for regional coordination on TDM and kind of popularizing what's going on in the field and helping the flow of information on what's up to date. Also responding to the pandemic, one of the things that we found, and you may be getting this sense from this presentation already, is that the UPWP process is a little bit rigid. And as we were moving through the pandemic, we found that we weren't, as a staff, able to respond as quickly and flexibly to changing needs and demands as we would have otherwise wanted. And so we put aside a little bit of money this year to enable us to do exactly that, to respond to requests for help from our municipal partners and other stakeholders to help people figure out, making it through the remainder of the pandemic and the recovery period, because we know that there's going to be a need. So I mentioned the recurring studies earlier, and this is one of them. Basically, the roadway-focused recurring studies are very similar. We have one that works on particular roadway corridors identified by stakeholders. So we call that mobility and access on sub-regional priority roadways. And the second one is addressing priority corridors from the LRTP needs assessment. The needs assessment is the element of the NPO's long-range plan, where every 4 years we go through and catalog as many of the transportation-related needs in the region as we can. Quantitatively, qualitatively, running all kinds of analyses, and we come up with this long list. And then we spend the next 4 years picking corridors off of it to study every year. All right, and safety and operations of selected intersections happens every year. Very straightforward study, looking at a number of intersections throughout the region, making recommendations primarily about safety, also sometimes about their operation as intersections. All right, so the future of the curb is a hot topic. It says in the first bullet point here that it follows up on 2019 and 2021 studies. So this is the third time we're doing work in this field in recent years. And the basic idea is that, as folks know, the curb lane, the area of a roadway immediately adjacent to the curb, is often used for parking, but there's increasing demand and even need to use that space for other purposes, bike lanes, bus lanes, delivery zones, all kinds of stuff. And because that's kind of an emerging field of study, there's still a need to establish different methods for measuring how the curb is used. So the study is going to seek to identify different curb management strategies that are in use across our region, collect some data on it, and then use that information to establish a comparative method so that different curbs can be compared on, curb usages can be compared on as close to an apples to apples basis as possible. All right, so we have a study called Addressing Equity and Access in the Blue Hills, which is something we're really excited about. It's a little bit different from kind of what the MPO has traditionally done. This was proposed by a coalition of nonprofit groups who came together and sent us basically a proposal that said, hey, look, you know, the Blue Hills Reservation is really close to some poor and marginalized areas of Boston geographically, but it's really hard to get there if you don't have a car. There's no particularly direct transit service that serves it very well. And they wanted us to take a look at some transit service planning to improve access. And so we're really gonna take this time and this opportunity to work deeply with those folks, the folks they represent, talk to a bunch of people, hear what the needs are, and then do some, make some recommendations for the MBTA and potentially other transit operators as to how to better serve access to the Blue Hills for all of the recreational and mental health resources that it provides. All right. So another study that we're very excited about is called Identifying Transportation Inequities in the Boston Region. And if you pay kind of close attention to the way the MPO and other transportation agencies typically analyze what we call transportation equity, it's often very forward-looking. It's trying to say, well, we have the status quo, let's not make it any worse. But the MPO is very interested in opportunities to not just do that, but to remediate the inequities of the existing status quo. And so what this study is trying to do is to identify those opportunities, those inequities, and how the MPO may be able to help reduce what have been historically inequitable and divergent outcomes. So it's going to have both qualitative and quantitative elements, and I think this is going to be a really interesting field of work for the next year. And finally, I mentioned before, we have the staff-generated research and technical assistance. We put aside a small amount of money each year to allow staff to pick projects that are important to them or that they think will be of use to the MPO that didn't make it into the UPWP at a small scale, often just interesting research projects to pursue on some staff time. All right, so just talk a little bit about next steps and where we go from here to contextualize all of this. So today is July 20th. Sorry, I have the wrong date on the slide there. It's on the left-hand bullet. And we're having this open house. The public comment period on the UPWP document is open until August 13th. At the August 19th meeting, we expect the MPO to vote on endorsing the FFY 2022 UPWP, which would then kind of close the formal process. During August and September, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation and Federal Highways and Federal Transit will review the draft UPWP. And then on October 1st, 2021, at the beginning of federal fiscal year 2022, it becomes the operative governing budget document for the MPO. So we want to hear from you. I know I've put a lot of information out there, and feel free to process it at whatever rate makes sense for you, but you can share your thoughts with us now. You can submit written comments by email to me at sjohnston@ctps.org. You can attend an MPO or UPWP committee meeting. They're all open to the public. Thursday, August 5th, Thursday, August 19th will both be UPWP committee meetings. Those are at 9 a.m. and then the MPO meets at 10 a.m. On Zoom. And then the comment period closes at the end of the day on Friday, August 13th. And finally, other ways to stay engaged so you can hear more about this process and other processes. You can sign up for the MPO's email list, follow us on all of your standard social media, and then past recordings of all past meetings are on YouTube. And I believe Rashina is going to throw some links in the chat. So at this point, thank you for listening, and I am happy to take any questions that you might have. You can put them in the chat or raise your hand, and Kate will call on you if you want to say something out loud.
And while people are thinking of their questions, I just want to highlight some of the things that Roisin shared. So she shared the Boston Region MPO's YouTube channel, which, as Sandy mentioned, has a bunch of recordings of our past meetings, as well as this will be available. So if you know anyone who might be interested and wants to learn more, please share that information. And again, we really encourage people to sign up for our email updates, because then you'll get notifications of any upcoming meetings, ways to engage, and other MPO events. But yes, with that, we'd love to hear your questions, hearing your thoughts, and feel free to input them in the chat. And just a reminder to raise your hand if you want to be unmuted. So again, that's either in your participants window, your reactions button, or in your toolbar. And if you don't have any questions today, or you kind of need some time, as Sandy mentioned, feel free to reach out to him. I'll also put, we'll send a quick follow-up email after this, and we'll have all the contact information of the staff on this call. We really want to help you and answer any of your questions. I also want to highlight for anyone, if you're brand new to the MPO process, the MPO has a great frequently asked questions page, which links to a bunch of our supporting material, as well as available videos and links to other programs. So maybe we don't have any, oh, here we go, we have a question. So Ali, I'm gonna unmute you now and you can ask your question.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, Ali Heiplum with the Conservation Law Foundation. Wondering if you could just share a little bit more about the identifying inequities study, what your thoughts are there. I haven't gotten a chance to go through the draft closely yet, so it very well could be in there, but I would just like to learn a little bit more about, I don't know, what the qualitative, how the approach to this, and sort of, yeah, any more background you can share would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So the fundamental answer to that is that the approach is still being defined, and part of what we're looking for now really is input into that. And our transportation equity coordinator, Betsy Harvey, is going to be managing the study, and certainly we'd be happy to put you in touch with her to talk about how to some ideas for handling it. I do want to just grab, if somebody can grab the exact page in the PDF and put it in the chat. There is a longer description in the document for what the study is going to look like, but the truth is that right now we don't really know, and part of it depends on some of the other tools that are being developed right now. Probably it's going to involve a number of interviews with folks, some stakeholder outreach, some using the technical tools the MPO has available. So I'm sorry I don't have a kind of a more detailed technical answer at this point in time, but really now and then up to the beginning of the new fiscal year is when we're looking for input on that. So if you have ideas, please do be in touch, and we'd be happy to set up a meeting.
Yeah, and I just want to add to Sandy's point, as staff, once the UPWP is endorsed, staff will develop work scopes, and they actually come back to the board and present it back. So that's where there's a little bit more of a detailed plan prior to this.
Okay, I'm not sure we're doing that this year.
Oh, okay, thank you.
There's a little bit of uncertainty about that, but I think we might not end up doing that this year.
Oh, okay. Well, one thing is that if you're interested in any of these studies, like Sandy mentioned, we'd love to put you in touch with the people who'll be working on them.
Yeah, and that's the description for that study is on page 129 of the PDF of the draft document, which is page 4-23. Yeah, thank you, Rasheen.
So if we don't have any more questions now, we just again want to highlight who to be in touch with. Always feel free to reach out. And if you have any questions about specific studies or just MPO work in general, we're always happy to either answer them or direct you to the right person. We encourage people to look at the document, share their comments with us, email them to Sandy, or submit them through our feedback form, whichever way works best for you. And always encourage people to attend the MPO meetings if you're available. They're also available on YouTube now. So maybe we can stay on for a few more minutes, but if we have no further questions, we're happy to close it out. And we just thank you so much for taking your time today to come and learn more about the Unified Planning Work Program and the upcoming studies we have for this next federal fiscal year. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you very much for all your thank yous, everyone. It's very sweet. Well, with that, maybe we'll close it out. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And again, never hesitate to reach out to any of the MPO staff. Thank you so much.
Good night.